सगळ्यांना म्यूट करायला सांगतो. आपल्या सगळ्यांना
Amit.
Yeah. Yes, Milind.
Hello, Steffi madam.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Steffi madam, please start.
Yeah. Shall we start?
Amit.
Yeah.
We will start. So first, Steffi madam, please start.
Okay. Okay, sir. Good evening, one and all. A hearty welcome to all the dignitaries, faculty members, and students to the webinar on Color Physics by Dr. Amit Joshi, Chief Manager, Asian Paints. On behalf of the Department of Physics, RD National College, under the aegis of IISc, IQAC, and DBT Star College Scheme, and a distinguished IC principal, Dr. Neha Jagtiani, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to each one of you to the webinar on the Industrial Applications of Color Physics by Dr. Amit Joshi. Let me introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Amit Joshi. Dr. Joshi completed his MSc in Analytical Chemistry from the Institute of Science, Mumbai. He was awarded the Gretak Macbeth Fellowship to pursue PhD in Paint and Polymer Science from ICT Mumbai. The title of his thesis was Coloration and Color Measurement of Plastic and Paint Systems. Dr. Joshi has published 7 papers in peer-reviewed journals and filed 3 patents to his credit. He is currently working as a Chief Manager in Asian Paints. A hearty welcome to you, sir, and we are grateful to have your time, and we are looking forward to a wonderful session with you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Steffi. At the outset, let me thank all of you at National College for inviting me. Also, today is Teachers' Day, so it has a special importance for all being there and kind enough to listen to my lecture. So, without much ado, I would like to start this lecture on industrial application of color physics. My request to all of you is please feel free to ask any questions. I know there is a question and answer session, but if there is something which needs some clarification, do feel free. Let the session be interactive. So maybe by raise of hand or something, if someone can manage, it would be great. So those questions can be asked. Okay. So may I start?
Amit sir, if there is any question from our participant, they can put in chat box and then you can directly answer.
Okay, so later on we will take?
Yes. After completion of I think after completion of your lecture, we will take question and answer session.
Fine.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So, so industrial application of color physics. Now, see, I have a background in chemistry, so definitely many of the participants in this session would be knowing much about color physics. So what would be the key takeaway from this presentation? So what I intend to do is to familiarize you with what all are the applications of color physics, so that at the end of the session, at least some idea regarding how color physics is applied in industry is known. Also, I will like to, share with you some of the current questions that are there, so which can be taken up as areas of research or areas of study for many of you. So that is the, the key learning objective or the key objective of this session. Also, the overall session would familiarize you with the various aspects of color, how color is used in day-to-day industry, what all are the ways to communicate color. So this is the flow of presentation. First, I will just introduce you to color. Then I will quickly take you to the causes of color. So a good amount of physics and chemistry is involved in causing color. So I will just quickly touch upon the causes of color. Then this entire bit of color communication, because color is a very subjective thing. What you would call red, someone would call it as, maybe a yellowish red. Someone would call it as a bluish red. So there is a considerable subjectivity in explaining or communicating color. So what all are the norms or standards for communicating color? That will be shared. Then we come to this entire bit on color measurement. Because if I want to do anything in industry, first thing that comes up is how do I measure something? There is a famous saying that what cannot be measured cannot be controlled. So measurement, metrics is a very important thing, especially from an industrial viewpoint. And that's why we will look at the ways to measure color. And finally, color matching is something which is very, very critical from a viewpoint of industry. So delivering the exact same color is something that is the need from the industry. The color matching part would be looked at. Okay, any questions, anything about that? Okay. So what is the significance of color? What does color deliver to us? So aesthetics, because aesthetics is something which color is very, very much related to. In fact, the founder of Revlon, the famous cosmetic brand, had once said that we don't sell cosmetics, we sell hope. So this aesthetics need not be restricted to paints and plastics, but it also covers the entire gamut of life. So this entire bit on cosmetics and all other areas are also there. So aesthetics is a very important function of color. Second bit is this authenticity part. It is very often that, you judge the authenticity of a product basis the color or its appearance. So authenticity plays a very, very important role with respect to color. For example, in my childhood, when we used to travel from Mumbai to Pune, there used to be a soft drink called as Gold Spot, which used to come in an orange color. Now, that time Parle, which was the manufacturer of this Gold Spot, used to have 2 bottling plants. And Gold Spot provided till Kalyan used to be coming from 1 bottling plant. And the moment you crossed Kalyan, the bottling plant used to change. And invariably, the color of this Gold Spot also used to change. So very often a common doubt that we used to have was, is this Gold Spot spurious? And that whole notion of spuriousness used to come because the color of Gold Spot used to change. So very often we associate the authenticity of a product because of its color. The third part is the attribute part. When I say attribute, what I am trying to associate is the psychological effect of color. So whenever there is a red signal or a red color, it's somewhere connotes the area of danger, whereas a green would mean a go ahead. Now there are no such fixed things that green means free of danger and red means dangerous. But it's just that over a period of time, there has been a psychological attribution of color. There are very fine ways by which color comes into our day-to-day life experiences. And there was a very interesting experiment that was done. Swimmers, were asked to swim in a swimming pool. On one day, the swimming pool was lit using yellow colored light. And after 3 days, the same swimming pool at the same temperature, water temperature, was lit by using blue colored light. And then the swimmers were asked as to when was the water colder, and when in fact the temperature of water was maintained at a constant temperature. Surprisingly, almost each and every participant in this survey mentioned that when the swimming pool was lit with blue colored light, the water was colder. So you can very well see how color plays a significant role in our psychological, feeling and psychological attributes. One more very good example of this entire play of color with our psychology would be, you would see that in most cases, whenever a surgeon performs a surgery in an operation theater, all the gowns, surgical masks, the curtains in the operation theater were invariably green in color. Now, if you look at it, why is the color green? Why is it that, you don't have red colored gowns or orange colored gowns or yellow colored gowns? And the reason is simple. The reason is that in an operation theater, the surgeons have to work, and very often there is a lot of blood, and blood has got red color, very dark and vibrant red color. Now, green is a complementary color of red, and that's why to soothe the mind, you would have green colored gowns and green colored curtains. So this is how you play with color. Okay. Then we come to color and its causes. Now on the screen, you can see a very, very important, statement made by Sir Isaac. It says, indeed, rays properly expressed are not colored. There is nothing else in them but a certain power and disposition to produce in us the sensation of this or that color. So what it means is that color per se is not a property. Okay, it's just a sensation that gets produced in the human brain, which results in color. And these are the broad 12 categories by which color is caused. So as physicists or people or as students of physics, you can broadly associate with most of them. So incandescence is nothing but basically heating. So your old bulbs used to be incandescent bulbs. They used to heat the tungsten filament and it used to produce color. Then there is this entire halogen lamps, which are gas excitation. Sodium vapors are released, and then sodium vapors are excited, and there is color. Third part is the entire electronic vibration rotation, the transition metals in a Ligon field. So there is this entire splitting of the electron orbital into the T2G and the EG suborbitals, and the transition of electron from the T2G to EG and back to T2G, which results in colored light getting produced. Molecular orbital is the most common cause. So most of your pigments, dyes, they produce color because of molecular orbital. Charge transfer is also an interesting field wherein, by which color can be produced. So these metals and semiconductors, your cadmium sulfides, cadmium sulfosylenides, these are all pigments which are based on semiconductors. So basically there is a band gap between the valence shell and the conducting shell. And the moment some light falls on it, the electron jumps from the valence shell to the conductance shells, and then it comes back. And that is how the color gets produced. So when I say cadmium sulfide is yellow in color, moment you put a slight amount of sulfur, so the sulfoselenide, the band gap changes. And that's why the color changes from yellow to orange. So these are the very slight ways by which, the color can be changed. Color centers is a very interesting thing. Many of you would have studied what are known as Schottky defects, Frenkel defects. So color centers is nothing but, because of these defects, there are these charges which are available and then which move and then cause color. Dispersion, refraction is a very common thing, well aware. Scattering is another phenomenon which causes color. Interference, so there are these, typically interference is a very, very effective way of producing color, and some of the colors that get produced because of interference, they are very, 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 very vibrant, and they give a very vibrant hue. So classic case of interference is your bubbles. When you have low soap bubbles, at times you see these different colors. So that is one very interesting phenomenon. I will be touching upon this, the industrial application of interference for producing colors, in few slides. Clear up to now? So now we come to what all are the requirements for color. Okay. So what is it that is required for color to get produced? So first and the most important thing is the illuminant. So there has to be a source of light for the color to be there. So that's why in dark, typically appreciation of color goes down drastically. Then there has to be an object which has to be colored. And the third part and the most important part is the observer. So there has to be someone who has to observe the color. When you come to illuminant, there are some terminologies which I will like you to remember because these terminologies I will be using in the later part of the presentation. So my request is to take note of this and ensure that these get registered by you. So as we all know, there is this electromagnetic region which spans from your gamma rays to right up to radio waves, or so right from the highest frequency to the lowest frequency. Then most of you would be aware of this concept of Planckian radiator. Now this Planckian radiator, as you would be aware, is nothing but a black sphere, and when you heat this black sphere, theoretical black sphere, the radiations that get emitted are specific to the temperature to which this black radiator gets heated. So if I heat a black body to, let's say, 6000 Kelvin, so the spectral emittance would be very specific to 6000 Kelvin. Moment I change from 6000 to 6500, the spectral emittance would differ. Okay. So Planckian radiator is nothing but a black body, which when I heat to a particular temperature, the graph of emittance versus wavelength remains constant. So that is what is the Planckian radiator. And this graph of emittance versus wavelength is called as spectral power distribution. Okay. So spectral power distribution is one more terminology I would request you to remember, that it is nothing but the graph of emissivity, because when we speak about illuminants, it is not reflectance of light, but it is the emission of light. Whereas whenever we talk about color of objects, it is the reflected light that comes. So the difference between a sun and a moon. Sun emits light, whereas the moon reflects light. So in case of sun, it would be an emission versus wavelength graph, whereas in case of moon, it would be a reflectance versus wavelength graph. So the spectral power distribution is nothing but the plot of emission versus wavelength. Okay. And then we come to this interesting phenomenon called as metamerism. Now, metamerism is nothing but a pair of standard and sample. Let's say I have two cars, and when I look at those cars in one particular light, let's say in your normal tube light, the color would match. But moment I look at these same two cars in some other light, let's say a sodium vapor lamp, or let's say a bulb, the colors will show mismatch. So many of the lady participants will be aware, they will typically take the clothes that they want to buy. First, they will look at it in the shop, and then they will even take it outside the shop and see how the color would look in a different illuminant. That is nothing but metamerism. When a pair of standard and sample match under one illuminant, but they mismatch under another illuminant, that is called as metamerism. Now, this is the electromagnetic region. Most of you are aware about it, right from your gamma waves to your radio waves. And there is a small band between, say, 400 to 700. These are biological sensitivities. So in some cases, it could be 720, 730. So broadly in this 400 to 700, the electromagnetic region. Now, somewhere we all need to know that when we use the word light, it gets restricted to electromagnetic region. So it has to be between 400 to 700. Whereas whenever we speak about radiations outside this region, we have to use the word electromagnetic radiation. So light is restricted to this 400 to 700 odd nanometer region. Now, this is the concept of spectral power distribution, which I was mentioning. And as I mentioned, I request you to register this terminology properly, because I will be using this in the subsequent slides. So as you can see on the y-axis is, I have not mentioned it, and there's a missed out. So on the y-axis is basically the emission. Just as we have reflectance, it is emission in this case, because it is light, a source of light. And on the x-axis, you have the wavelength region. So now, when I say average north sky daylight, what it means is that countries which are in the northern hemisphere, India is in the northern hemisphere, and the sunlight that falls in India will have an emission versus wavelength spectrum as is given in the first graph. Now, if you look at the fluorescent light, now fluorescent light is nothing but a tube lights, old tube lights, which were called as CWF, cool white fluorescence. So there, the spectrum is that, as is shown in the middle graph. And you can see some of there are some light line spectra. So there are sharp lines jetting in that graph. Now the way tube light works is that you would have seen there is something called as a starter. Okay. So, and in that tube light, there are mercury based material. Now this starter, because of the high, charges that get developed, the mercury gets excited. And then it emits light in the UV region. So you will see typically at the borderline of 400 or in the blue region, you will have these sharp spectral lines. These in turn excite some of the phosphors which are there in the tube light, and which then produce this entire gamut of radiations right from 400 to 700. So this is what is known as a cool white fluorescence. And as I mentioned, this is a big area of study for many of the physicists and chemists. How do I produce radiations? How do I produce a very sharp radiation at a particular wavelength? The entire bit of lasers, more precise the wavelength, better it is. So these are some of the big areas of research, which, not only some of the fundamental research, but even industrial research. So you have the Samsungs and Apples of the world, which claim I can produce million colors in my screen. So these are the phosphors and entire study that happens, and where is physicists and chemists come into picture. The third part is the incandescent light, which is nothing but your old bulb, which used to have, wherein the tungsten gets heated up and it produces light. So you can clearly see it used to have a reddish yellow tone, and you can actually see the high emission in the reddish region or the yellowish region. Now the cartoon that I've showed clearly demonstrates what is meant by metamerism. As you can see in the first figure, you have the bulb under which the two samples, two panels look similar. The moment you change from a bulb to a sunlight, the panel looks different. One appears green and one appears bluish. So this is nothing but the concept of metamerism. So any questions? Any questions? Because
Dear students, if you have any questions, any participant, if you have any questions, you can ask.
Is it clear? Any doubts or?
If you have any question, participant, you can.
So that then I will go to the next part.
Yes, you can type in chat box.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So now we will move to the object. So now we have looked at illuminant. Okay. Now we will go to the object part. Sorry, I got muted. So I will just go back to from object. So in case of object, the color comes mainly through pigments and dyes. Now the difference between pigments and dyes is pigments generally produce color not only by absorption, but there is also some scattering associated with pigments. And the advantage of pigments is that advantage, or the feature I would say of pigments, is that they impart opacity. Because I'm from Asian Paints and I'm from the coatings industry, imparting opacity is a very critical aspect of coating, because the light which falls on the coating, it should not get transmitted and fall on the substrate and then come back to the human eye. Okay? So what happens is when light falls on a paint or a coating, the pigments in that, they scatter light and they don't allow light to reach the substrate. And that's why you cannot see the substrate. So this is the importance of pigments. Then we come to dyes. Dyes impart color mainly by absorption. So you will see that dyes do not impart opacity. They retain the transparency. So dyes give transparency and produce color mainly by absorption. There is very little scattering in it. Another difference between pigments and dyes is that dyes become part of the system because they dissolve in the system, whereas pigments remain as a separate entity in the system. That is one more difference. Then we come to this entire bit of physical interaction. So very often you would see that, you know, the beautiful colors of a butterfly or a peacock. Now, these come because of what are known as the physical interactions of light, what I had called earlier as the interference effect, you know. So what happens is, you know, so the photo that I have shown is of a iridescent pigment. Iridescent pigment, or an interference, or a pigment which produces color through interference. So the way it is prepared is there is a mica core, you can see, and over it we, you know, we deposit either through PVD, which is physical vapor deposition, or through CVD, which is chemical vapor deposition. We deposit a material with high refractive index. So typically your titanium dioxide, which has a refractive index of around 2.75, or an iron oxide, which has, you know, which could have a refractive index of somewhere around 3. And because of that, what happens is when the light falls on the first substrate, which is the metal oxide part of it gets reflected from the surface itself, and part of it penetrates. So it refracts and comes inside. Again, when it comes inside, it hits the substrate of mica, which has multiple layers. And then again, it gets reflected and comes out. Now, depending upon, you would have studied the Bragg's law. Now, depending upon the time spent in all this, so that, which is a function of the thickness of the layer, or the D, which is called as spacing in the layer, there will be either constructive interference of certain wavelengths or destructive interference. And depending upon that, basis the angle of viewing, you will see multiple colors. So typically when you look at bubbles, or you look at, you know, some of these peacock's feather, if you change the angle of viewing, the color will change. Now this is the reason for the change, because when you change the angle, some wavelengths will get constructively interfered and some would be destructively interfered. So this is one more area which, you know, is also an area of research, and as to how to produce multiple colors and new effects. And a lot of it has to do with biology also, because many of these inspiration for these is from our biological world, wherein you see some of these insects with exceptionally brilliant colors. And that color is coming solely because of these physical interactions. It's almost like a monochromator, which has a diffraction grating, you know, wherein you have these multiple thicknesses, ridges, which is causing these interferences to happen and which produce color. So this is very, very interesting area of research for many of the physicists. Then we come to this entire bit on observer. Now, why is observer important? The observer is important because, as I mentioned, color is a sensation that gets produced in brain. So let's say a cockroach doesn't see color. It just sees some light, whether there is some lightness, darkness, and basis that it, you know, finds its way. Many of the dogs, they have only dichromatic color, so they are not able to see the entire color gamut. Humans are having entire sizable color gamut. Whereas the same for honeybees, their sensing, radiation sensing extends even into the UV region. So as seen, you would have multiple like the same object will appear different for different people or for different species. So that is wherein this observer part comes into picture, and that is where I would say that color is quite different, because it is not the property of an object like a mass. A mass for an elephant or for a human being or for a cockroach remains the same. Whereas in case of color, depending upon who observes that object, the color would change. And that is wherein the entire complexity comes in. Okay. Now this figure of color of eye you can see. So human eye, there is this part called as retina, which you would have heard of often. Now this retina is full of what are known as rods and cones. These are basically cells, and the rods are responsible for lightness and darkness. So what happens is, whenever late in the evening or towards night, when the illumination is less, you will find that the rods become very active, whereas cones are responsible for colored vision. Okay, so for colored vision to be there, you should have a certain basic amount of light. Okay, if the light levels are very low, the rods come into picture and you won't be able to appreciate the true color. Okay, and the cones are mainly of three types: red, green, and blue. Now, when I say red, green, and blue, what they do basically is that they produce a sensation of red color. The cones themselves are not red or green or blue, but through some chemical reactions that happen, depending upon the wavelength of light that falls on them, a signal gets produced, which is either for the brain, it interprets it as red or green or as blue. Okay. So any questions till now? Because then I will be going to I'll quickly cover theories of vision, more relevant for biologists and this, but just a quick snapshot. But till that time, any question on illuminant, object, observer, anything?
Amit sir, there is one question from Gaurav Jha. Why the both plates look like green in bulb light?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a very good question. I will just explain to you. Now, the way human eye looks at color, it looks at only 3 points. There are 3 coordinates which it looks at. So I'll be covering that in the subsequent slides. So let's say, just to give a parallel example, let's say there is a sum of 10. This sum of 10 can be 5 plus 3 plus 2. That also gives 10. Or it could be 1 plus 8 plus 2. That also gives 10. In both cases, the sum remains as 10. Clear, Gaurav? Now, what happens is, let's say, when I look at a panel, when I see it is green in color, what is happening is light from the illuminant falls on the panel. Other than green, all the wavelengths get absorbed, and the green wavelength gets reflected, and the human eye looks at it as green. Let's say the illuminant doesn't have a particular color. So let's say when I said that it is 1 plus 8 plus 2, and I think the other example I had given was 5 plus 3 plus 2. Now let's say it doesn't have that phi part in it. In that case, if the illuminant doesn't have that phi part, since the incident light itself doesn't have a phi in it, what will get reflected will only be 3 plus 2. And that phi part is completely missing. And that's why you see metamerism. Classic example I would give is for cars. When let's say I'm driving a blue colored car, and in one case the street lamps are white in color. So I will see color as blue. Moment I change the color from white colored street lamps to yellow colored street lamps, what will happen is a yellow colored sodium vapor lamp typically has got only yellow wavelengths. Because it has got only yellow wavelength, question of reflecting blue wavelength just doesn't come. So that blue car, will look as dirty brown because there is no color that gets reflected. Okay. And that's why you would see this metamerism. The change in illuminant, the color would change because the incident light itself doesn't have that particular wavelength. And that is why you see a different color. Gaurav, have I clarified your doubt?
Sankesh, if you have any question, you can ask. Sankesh Shetty.
Hello.
हाँ बोल
Hello.
बोल.
Sir, will you explain that emittance versus radiance graph once again?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So here, what I have plotted is typically, let's say there is sunlight. Now there are what instruments known as spectroradiometers. So what it does is whatever light that falls on the machine, it will find out what is the emission of light, emission of that light. So I plot that on the y-axis. If it would have been a ball, let's say a cricket ball, it doesn't produce any light. What it does is reflects light. So there, in that case, I put I put the term reflectance because some sunlight is falling on that ball and it is reflecting light. So that is why I plot a reflectance versus wavelength graph. Okay, instead of an emission versus wavelength. And this graph of emission versus wavelength is called a spectral power distribution, which I'll be using in subsequent slides.
Thank you, Amit sir. Thank you, Sankesh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now
Thank
I
you,
want to quickly cover theories of vision. So there are basically these two theories, which is the trichromatic theory, which says that basically color can be produced by using mixture of three colors. And the second one is the opposite channel theory, which says that there are three opposing channels. One is the red-green channels, basically the complementary colors. Second is the yellow-blue channel, which is again the complementary color. And the third is the lightness-darkness channel. So basically, whenever light falls on your eye through reflectance from a colored object, there are three opponent channels. So whenever a red color object is there, there cannot be any greenness in it because red and green are opposing channels. So either it has to be red or green. Either it has to be blue or yellow. So this is the opponent channel theory. And then we come to this interesting bit called as color blindness. So there are different types of color blindness. So what I mentioned in the observer part, there are these red, blue, and green cones. Now, in some cases, in some human beings, there are these, because of mutations, some of these cones become deactivated. And those individuals cannot see all the color. So there could be either a red-green color blindness or the yellow-blue color blindness, or in very rare cases, you could have a person completely colorblind. Neither can he see red, green, nor yellow. Now, in fact, during my college days, I was working on one project related to signals. So these traffic signals. Now, you can imagine if a person is colorblind, for him a red signal or a green signal, both will look as gray. And he won't be able to, just know whether he has to stop at the signal or he has to go. And that's why you would see in most cases, the green color that is there in the signals is always bluish green. So the driver knows that when it is bluish in color, he has to go. And when it is gray, he has to stop. Okay. So these are some of the applications that are there. Or there is one very unique thing about colorblind people, and that is during wartime. The enemy soldiers are typically camouflaged. What they will try to do is, in this green grass, they will wear a green color something, and they will try to get camouflage. Now, colorblind people have this extra sensation to differentiate between lightness and darkness. Okay. And that's why very often these colorblind people are used to detect if there is, so from a helicopter, they are asked to detect whether there are any soldiers, enemy soldiers hiding in or camouflage. These are some of the interesting applications of, of color and theories of color. Then we come to this entire bit on color mixing systems. So there are two types of color mixing systems. One is the additive color mixing, wherein the primaries are red, green, and blue. So you can see that a combination of, let's say, red and blue will give you a magenta. Combination of blue and green will give you cyan. Cyan is nothing but a bluish green or a turquoise green. And a combination of red and green will give you yellow. And all red, green and blue put together will give you white light. And subtractive color mixing, now the combinations of the primary mixing become the primaries in subtractive color mixing. So your yellow, cyan and magenta are the subtractive color mixing. Okay. Now additive color mixing typically happens wherever there is light involved. So all your digital displays, your televisions, wherever there is emission of light, additive color mixing happens. Okay. And wherever there is absorption of light, your pigments, your dyes, there subtractive color mixing. Anyone who, I don't know, anyone who has come across printing inks or printing, there is this common term called as CMYK value, which stands for cyan, magenta and yellow, and K stands for black. So these are called as the printer's primaries. So any printing job, you would have the CMYK because they are involved in subtractive color mixing, because the pigment absorbs light, and when all the lights are absorbed, or cyan is so let's say there is a cyan colored item, so all colors other than cyan, all wavelengths other than cyan will get absorbed. When there is a magenta, all colors other than magenta, those wavelengths will get absorbed. In case of yellow, all wavelengths other than yellow, those will get absorbed. And when all are mixed together, all wavelengths get absorbed, and that's why it becomes black. Whereas in additive mixing, there is an addition, and that's why we know white light is an addition of all the wavelengths, and that's why it is called as additive color mixing. Any questions?
Dear students, any question you have, any question you can ask, or you can raise hand. Oh. Amit sir, I think there is no question. Akshay, hello. Yes, any question you can put in chat box. What causes tetrachromatic vision? Okay. Amit sir,
Yeah, Milind.
there are two questions. One question from Vinayak Kamli. How color production done in industry? And second one is from Chandrajit Yadav. What causes tetrachromatic vision?
So in industry, the color is produced mainly by subtractive color mixing in most of the industry. So that is mainly by usage of pigments and dyes. Okay. So that is how the color gets produced in industry. If you go to these digital industries, they work on all these phosphors, or there are these like nowadays, I don't know, you would have heard about what are known as quantum dots. So there are these ways by which you can produce color by playing with the structure of some of these compounds, and that is how in the electronic display you have this color that get produced using emission or light. But in broad cases, 80 to 85% of the cases, let's say the coating industry, printing industry, or your furniture industry, whatever, plastic industry, the color comes mainly because of subtractive color mixing, and that is through pigments or dyes. Okay. Tetrachromatic, I don't know exactly why it is caused or how it is caused. So maybe later on I can just, get back to Milind.
Okay.
Because some of these, the causes are exactly not, but whatever could be the, various explanation, maybe I will just check and get back to you.
And Amit sir, there is one more question from Satish Gupta. We have seen many paint colors and dyes. There is always presence of little quantity of lead. Why we use lead and how it affects the color? Can we replace lead?
Yeah, so lead is nowadays lead is no longer there in color. In earlier days, lead used to be very commonly used. There are multiple reasons. One, lead used to give very vibrant colors. Second is lead gives very good opacity, and third, it is very cheap. But because of its poisonous nature, lead has been completely removed from all decorative paints. From industrial paints, wherever there is very little exposure, lead continues to be used. But now lead has been completely replaced. In fact, there is a government rule that lead cannot be more than 90 parts per million. And in fact, any paint, you look at any pail of paint, any bucket of paint, you'll typically see that lead levels less than 90 ppm. So lead is no longer used in the paint industry.
Thank you, Amit sir. Thank you, Satish, Chandrajit, Vinayak Kamble, Sankesh, Gaurav. Amit sir,
Yeah.
you can
So
proceed.
now, So now we go to color communications, because as I mentioned, color communication is very critical. Main reason being, as I mentioned, that main reason being color is a very subjective thing. So what you would call as a pale red, someone else would call as a dark red. And that's why to bring this objectivity, color communication becomes very important. And this is a very excellent, beautiful cartoon of Peanut. This is a famous comic strip wherein, Peanut tells that, don't forget that grass green is an elusive term. The color of grass can be changed by turning the blades as they are blown by the wind. And he gives a big explanation as to how to observe a green, if you want to call it as a grass green. So there are very many variables that cause a change in color. So these are all the complexities of describing or communicating color. So that's why, in order to communicate color, there were several color order systems that were there. And these color order systems, there was this Munsell color order system, Ostwald color order system, and the natural color system. I'll quickly take you through the Munsell color order system because it defines the 3 coordinates for color. So what it says is any color can be defined basis 3 things. One is the hue, second is the value, and third is the chroma. Now this hue is nothing but the different types of color. So green, red, yellow, blue, these are the different hues. Value, as you can see from the screen, indicates the darkness or the lightness part. Okay. So in any color, if the color is light, then the value is higher. If it is dark, it is lower. And then chroma indicates the saturation of the color. Okay. So if I have a white paint and if I keep on adding red, the red will get saturated. So the chroma would increase. So just remember, color can be represented with 3 characteristics. One is the hue, other is the value, and third is the chroma. Okay. As you can see, I've just given the definition of hue, value, and chroma. Actually, Munsell was not a scientist, but he was a painter. And he used to teach his students and he used to find a lot of difficulty in explaining which color it should be painted. So he devised this entire color order system so that he can exactly specify which color he wants his student to paint. Later on, this entire CI color specification came in picture. Now, CI is nothing but a body. It's French word for Commission Internationale de l'Éclairage. Éclairage, as some of you would know, means illumination. Okay, so there is this body, just as you have an ASTM or you have an ISO or maybe some physics committee which defines standards. So the CI typically is a body which defines about light and color. So CI came up with these color specifications. Now, these are some of the typical color specifications that are used to explain color. So first it came out with what are known as the tri-stimulus values. Okay, and these are given by capital X, capital Y, and capital Z. Then they came out with what are known as chromaticity coordinates, and the latest ones are what are known as CI LAB, L star, A star, B star. I'll quickly take you through these, just a broad snapshot as to how these are used in industry and what is the significance. Okay. Now, how do you calculate this tri-stimulus value? Because as I mentioned, one of the biggest complexity with respect to color is it is subjective. Now, how do I convert this subjective sensation called as color into objective values? Because then life will become very simple. Even if I have, let's say, a vendor somewhere sitting in Vietnam, and he wants to send me clothes to India. Now, from sitting here, I should be able to see what colored material he's producing. Or for that matter, Walmart sitting in USA sources its clothes. So even in that clothes, it may source the entire T-shirt from Bangladesh, whereas the zip may come from China. Now let's say the zip has to match exactly to the T-shirt. Now sitting in USA, how does he ensure that the color of the zip produced in China and the T-shirt produced in Bangladesh match? Yeah, sorry, there was some game. So tri-stimulus values were the first attempt to convert this color, which is a subjective thing, into objective thing. And this is the definition for the tri-stimulus values. So you have capital X, you have capital Y, and you have capital Z. Now, how do we come to this capital X? So it's just a summation from 400 to 700, which is the visible region, of E lambda. Now, E lambda is nothing but the spectral power distribution, which I had mentioned. Basically, the emission at a particular wavelength. So let's say if I'm talking about sunlight, and if at 400 wavelength, it gives a certain emission levels. So that value has to be put. X bar lambda are literature specified, what we call as standard observer functions. I won't get into those details as to how those are derived. And R lambda is the reflectance of that particular object. So let's say I have a green colored ball. When light falls on it, there will be that light which gets characterized using E lambda. R lambda would be on a spectrophotometer. The light will fall on that green ball. Green colored wavelengths majoritarily will get reflected. Those would be captured by the monochromator, and you will have a particular reflectance at a particular wavelength. So that's at 560 or 600, there would be a certain unit of reflectance. And X bar lambda, as I mentioned, would be the standard observer function. Now, just remember, X stands for the red-green channel, Y stands for the luminosity function. So it mainly gives the lightness, darkness, and Z gives the blue. So, X stands for redness, Y stands for greenness, and Z stands for blueness. Y also gives what is known as the luminosity function, or how much light is getting produced. So, just a quick, quick reference to our day-to-day observation. If you see, have you ever wondered why is it that only green is used as signal, not some other color? One of the reasons is to produce a green light, the amount of energy required to produce a green light of particular brightness is much lower than, let's say, some other light. So that's why so that Y part, which is the luminosity, which gives the illumination level, that is given by the E lambda, Y lambda, and R lambda. So this is how you get the XYZ values. So let's say if I have any sample in a spectrophotometer, I will put it in the spectrophotometer. I will get the R lambda, or the wavelength, or the reflectance at each wavelength. I know what light is falling from the spectrophotometer. So I know at each wavelength what is the emission of that particular radiation. And X bar lambda I get from literature. So now for any sample, I get the X value, Y value, and the Z value, or basically the tri-stimulus values. One of the limitation of this tri-stimulus values was that if you just code the tri-stimulus values, a person cannot visualize what color it would be. So the CI came out with what is known as the chromaticity coordinates, which is nothing but small x, small y, small z, and where small x is x, which is the tri-stimulus value, divided by a summation of all three tri-stimulus values. Okay. Now here I will just quickly come to a famous chart. I don't know, some of you would have seen this chart. Typically any lab working on illumination or color would typically have this chromaticity chart. Wherein a small x, which is this chromaticity coordinate which I mentioned, gets plotted against small y. And you have this horseshoe-shaped spectrum, wherein the most vibrant colors are at the periphery and the center is with is where the illumination lies. Okay, so that is what is known as the chromaticity chart. Now, what is the practical significance of this chromaticity chart? So let's say I go to a printer, okay, and tell him that I want to print a red of a Vodafone. You have this Vodafone's red color. No? So I want to print, let's say, a letterhead with Vodafone, and that Vodafone, that red color is specified. Now, how does the printer know whether he will be able to produce this red color or not? So, what the printer does is a very simple thing. He has his raw materials, which are printing inks. Now, the most vibrant printing inks, he will plot the small x and small y values. So, basically, he will see what is the chromaticity coordinate of each of these inks, and basis that he will plot the entire spectrum. So, basically, he plots the perimeter. And then if Vodafone comes and says that I want to produce a color red of this type, he will measure that red color and he will also find out the chromaticity coordinate of that red color. Now, if that red color falls within this horseshoe-shaped spectrum, within the spectrum of his inks, he knows that he will be able to produce that red color using combination of inks. But if that red falls outside the spectrum, there is no way he will be able to produce that red color. Okay. So this is the practical significance of chromaticity chart. Okay. So as you can see, as you go towards the perimeter, the color becomes very vibrant. So the chroma basically increases a lot. As you come closer towards the white area, it becomes less and less chromatic. So it turns more towards achromatic. Okay. Then CIE over a period. Now, one of the limitations of this chromaticity chart is the non-uniformity. You can see the green region is much bigger as compared to, let's say, the blue region. What it means is that it is a non-uniform color space. Okay. So what CIE felt was that let us try to make the color space more uniform, and then they came up with this concept called as CILAB, and these are the equations to find out L star, A star and B star. So what I would recommend is for you to remember is whenever, let's say, if any one of you comes into a color industry, L star stands for lightness and darkness, and higher the lightness, higher is the L star value. So if you can just see 116 y is the luminosity function, or that y tristimulus value which I had mentioned earlier. That is the y of the sample. Yn is the luminosity function for the illuminant. So if you have sunlight, then in that case, it is the y value of the illuminant or the sunlight raised to 1/3 minus 16. Now let's say if a sample completely reflects whatever light falls on it, in that case, y becomes equals to yn, and then the whole value becomes 100. Okay. So that's why when I say something is completely reflecting light, the L star is 100, and this is how it gets derived from the equation as well. Similarly, you have A star, which is derived again from your tristimulus values x and y, and B star, which is again derived from your tristimulus values y and z. Okay. And now we come to this very interesting parameter called as delta E, which is the deviation of a particular color from the standard. So just as we have a point in space, in our 12th standard, we would have studied, 11th, 12th, we have studied that there in a three-dimensional space, I can define the coordinates of a point, x, y, and z. So in case of color space, the three coordinates are, instead of x, y, z, there is L star, A star, and B star. Using these coordinates, I can define any color in the color space. And we know that the distance between 2 points is given by the delta squares of delta. So let's say I have 3 coordinates, L star, A star and B star. The difference between a standard and a sample, if I want to define, that would be given by delta E, which is delta L square, where delta L is nothing but L of sample minus L of standard. A star is A, and similarly for A and B. And the equation would give the distance of a particular point in color space from the standard. Okay, am I clear? So this delta E is a very important important attribute in the paint industry or any color related industry, because it gives me the deviation from my standard. Because in practical cases, I can never have zero deviation. So what I define, let's say I have a customer who says I want a specific blue colored, Maruti. So then typically I will say that, okay, I will give this blue colored paint for the Maruti, but what is the tolerance that is permitted? So the delta E is nothing but the tolerance, because I can never have zero as the tolerance. In any practical case, in any industry, there has to be a tolerance given. Now this delta E defines the tolerance with respect to color, as to how much the color has deviated from standard. So this is the representation of Scilab. You can clearly see, just let me see whether I can put on the pointer. I'll just use my cursor. So you can see now the color space is like a sphere in the 3 dimension. Now this circle will be one of the layers. Let's say it's like a watermelon which I'm slicing horizontal. I mean, this each layer, in the 2 dimensions of each layer, there is a value and there is a B value. Okay. So which defines the color. And in the Z axis, there is the lightness, darkness part of it. So this same disk, if I take it up, then it will, that same red color will look lighter. Same red, this disk, if I take it down in the Z direction, it will become darker. Okay. So these are the 3 coordinates. A star is the X coordinate, B star is the Y coordinate, and the lightness, darkness is the Z coordinate. Wherein this entire light, so the same red color will be either lighter or darker. So any questions till now?
I will check chat box. Yes, there is no question, Amit sir.
Okay. Yeah, clear?
Yes, you can.
So, so just as a point in a space can be represented by Cartesian axis, Cartesian coordinates, your X and Y. There is one more way by which you can, define a point in space, and that is known as polar coordinates. So what I can do is I can define a point in terms of just a minute. I will try to explain it to you through A. I can just give me a minute. Maybe I will try to draw a line so that you will understand that better. So basically what I'm trying to say is I can have a point and I define an angle that the point makes with the center. And then I can also define the length of the line from the center. That is nothing but your polar coordinates. Okay. So basically I can define a point by the angle that it forms with the center and the length of the line instead of X and Y coordinates. And that is how you give this entire thing of converting this A and B values to what are known as angles. So these on the left, what you see as red. So let's say 0 and 360 is a perfect red. So anything, any color between 350 and 35 is considered as a red light. If I consider this entire as a polar coordinate, and that is how color gets defined basis the angle. So when you go to this, here this B and A value. Now if I have a point here somewhere, I can define it in terms of the length that it has from the center, which defines the chroma, and the angle that it subtends with the center forms the hue. Okay, because as I change the angle, the color changes from red to yellow to green to blue. Okay, is it clear? Also in the big chart, you can see here it is red. Then as we go towards yellow, the angle that this forms, it goes to 90 degrees. So you get a yellow here. As you go to 180, it becomes green. And as you go to 270, it becomes blue. So the angle that gets formed with the center defines the color or the hue. As you go away from the center, towards the circumference, the chroma increases. So you can see the color becomes more richer or redder. Okay. And in the third dimension, the lightness, darkness will come into picture. So just to quickly give you an example, now just by looking at these LAB values, I am able to tell what color it is. So when I say it is L star is 83.7, which means that it is a fairly light colored material. Whereas A and B are very low. Okay, it's just very close to 0, which means that it is a gray colored material. It doesn't have color like red, yellow, blue, green. You know, it is just a play of black and white. Whereas same thing, when I go to, let's say, a brilliant red, okay, it has an L value of 43.7. So it is on the darker side, but it has got a very high value of A, because as I mentioned, A stands for, a positive A stands for red, negative A stands for green. So you can see that it is a positive A, which means that it's a red colored material. And it also has got considerable amount of B star, which means that it's a yellower red and not a bluer red. Because if it would have been a bluer red, you would have got a negative B value. Okay, am I clear? So that is how, just by looking at figures, I'm able to tell whether a particular material is red color, it is darker, lighter, yellower, bluer, whether it has got some undertones. All these things can be specified. And this is how someone sitting in USA is able to source items basis the economic value from different regions. So if the zip is coming cheaper from China, he will source the zip from China, green colored zip from China. If the cloth is coming cheaper from Bangladesh, he will source the green colored cloth or the t-shirt from Bangladesh. And by defining the specifications with LAB and delta E, he is able to ensure that the same green color appears on the finally stitched green t-shirt. So this is the practical significance of CI-LAB. And then we come to some of these things which are basically the color indices equations. I won't get too much into it, but just as a physicist, you should know there is a very interesting theory known as the Kubelka-Munk theory. And you can Google it and learn more about it. Now, Kubelka and Munk were Hungarian scientists. I think they were more of physicists rather than chemists, who said that, they defined color in terms of the absorption coefficient and the scattering coefficient. K stands for absorption and S stands for scattering. And using this Kubelka-Munk theory, so there are some of these tenets of Kubelka-Munk theory, which will later on come to, which are used for color matching, which is a very practical application from an industry's perspective. Okay, so I won't get into this now. Maybe later on I will try to cover, time permits. Any questions?
Yes, sir. Dear student, any question? You can unmute and you can ask. Amit sir, there is no question. You can proceed.
Okay. Is it getting too boring? Because
No,
I think
no.
fact that there are no questions means you know. So we come to this color measurement part. Now here a good bit of optics and all those are required. So these are some of the advantages of color measurement using an instrument. Because typically when we do in the work in the lab, the eyes start getting strained because of too much of looking at panels, because keep on looking at color, see whether there is any difference. There is a lot of strain on the human eye. So typically you use an instrument which is a spectrophotometer. Now the spectrophotometer has what is known as the light source. It has what is known as the illumination conditions, a monochromator, which is typically a grating, and a detector. Okay, so this is something which is very common to a physics student. And then what is very critical is the viewing geometry. So this is how this entire spectrophotometer illumination geometries are defined. So typically the incident light, whatever is the so when I say 45-0 geometry, the illuminant is at 45 degree and the observer is at 0 degrees. Okay. Similarly, a 0-45 is wherein the illuminant is at 0 degrees and the observer is at 45 degrees. Now, what is the significance of this is that in addition to color, there is one more thing called as gloss. So when we say appearance, these are some of the finer nuances. So when we use the word appearance, it means color plus gloss. Okay. Whereas when we use the word color, it is irrespective of the surface reflection. Gloss is nothing but the surface reflection. So when a ray of light hits the surface, a part of it gets reflected from the surface itself before it interacts with any of the pigments that are there in the bulk of the material. So that surface reflection, if the reflection is very high, we say that it is a very glossy surface. So in a theoretically perfect mirror, the gloss is 100%. So if I'm putting 100 units of incident light, exactly 100 units of light get reflected at a specular angle. So angle of incidence is equal to angle of reflection. Now in practice, what happens is whenever I want to appreciate color of a very glossy substance, this light that falls on my human eye, natural tendency of an observer is to avoid the gloss or the surface reflection so that he can see the color. And so he tilts the panel. As a result of that, he tilts the panel and he avoids the gloss. Now this, to simulate this viewing angle, wherein he is avoiding the surface reflection, this 45-0 geometry or 0-45 geometry came into picture. Because what would happen is, in a very highly glossy material, the light which falls on 45 degree, if the detector or the observer is also at 45 degree, all the surface reflection will mask the color. Now, in order to avoid that, I keep the observer at 0 degrees so that the entire specular part of reflected light gets eliminated and only the non-specular part gets observed and you are actually able to observe the color. Okay. So this is the practical significance of the various viewing geometry. And this is the D8 geometry. Now the D stands for diffuse and 8 stands for 8 degree observer. Okay, and this is the most common observer. And typically in most of the spectrophotometers, the illuminant is D65. Now why do we use D65? What is the significance of D65? In the earlier slides, I had mentioned about this Planckian radiator. What has been observed is that in the northern hemisphere, the sunlight that falls, the emission versus wavelength, that which falls, and if I put a spectral power distribution, it exactly matches to if I heat a Planckian radiator to 6500 Kelvin. So when I heat a Planckian radiator to 6500 Kelvin, the emission of radiations against wavelength match to the sunlight that is seen in northern hemisphere. So that's why across India or across large parts of northern hemisphere, you will have D65 as the standard illuminant for color specification. If you go to Northern America and northern parts of Northern America, they move to D75 because the sunlight that falls in the northern parts of Northern America is close to a Planckian radiator when it is heated to 7,500 Kelvin. So this is the significance of that Planckian radiator from an industrial's perspective. Okay. Then we come to this entire bit of color matching. So as I mentioned, there is this Kubel-Kamann theory, which says that there is this absorption coefficient K and the scattering coefficient of light, which is S. Now this K by S can be calculated by the equation K by S equals to 1 minus R infinity square upon 2R, where R is nothing but the reflectance of a wavelength by the sample. So I keep a sample on the spectrophotometer, it will reflect light. I do this 1 minus R infinity square upon 2R and I get K by S value. Okay. Another interesting thing about this K by S is that it is additive and it is linearly proportional to the concentration of colorant. Okay. So if I have the individual K absorption coefficients for individual pigment, let's say I have a blue pigment, yellow pigment and a green pigment. I know the K value of blue, I know the S value of blue. So KB and SB, I know the K value of yellow and the S value of yellow and the K value of green and S value of green. So I know KB, KY, KG, I know SB, SY, SG. Now, if I know the concentrations of each of these blue pigment, yellow pigment, green pigment, then I can define the K by S value of the mixture. And that is the basis for color matching. So what happens in color matching is that, let's say Asian Paints today gives more than 1 lakh shades. So how do I match a shade? Okay, if someone comes to me and says that, okay, I want this green color, which is similar to my curtain. Okay, so what do? I take the green colored curtain, I measure it on a spectrophotometer. Okay, now using this spectrophotometer, I will get the reflectance values. Using these reflectance values, I will be able to get the K by S, target K by S that I have to match. Okay, then I know what all colorants I have, red, blue, green, yellow, magenta, whatever colorants I have. And I know the K values and the S values of each of these colorants. So then what happens is I know the target K by S, I know the individual K and S of each of these blue, green, yellow, magenta colorants. Using a computer and an iterative loop, I keep on changing the concentration values until I come to a exact concentration value for each of these colorant, which will exactly match my target K by S. Okay, and that is why this entire color matching thing and this explosion of the number of shades that are getting offered through coatings increased with the advent of computers, because this entire iterative loop-based softwares could be programmed, and we can quickly keep on changing the concentration values of each of these colorants till we are able to get the target K by S. So that is how the entire Kubel-Kamann theory works. Now it's very easy to explain, but it's very, very difficult, and there are some limitations which I've mentioned, so which I won't go into it. But this is one very, very big area of research, both for physicists, for like typically in a color field, because it's a confluence of physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. Typically, when many of these universities in US like Rochester, which work a lot on color, they would have a mix of people. So they would have physicists, chemists, there would be computationalists. So these theories are used to work on the color matching part. Okay. And then, as I mentioned, there are some of these limitations of Kubel-Kamann theory, and now this entire multiplex theory or artificial neural network. And these are now, very buzzwords that are there. So one very interesting thing which we are working on currently is what is the use of artificial intelligence or ANN for finding out what is the color of a material, of an unknown. How do I match the color? So in ANN, what happens is I have an input and I have an output. So the neural network basically defines the pathways to connect this input with the output. Because over a period of, Asian Paints is there for 60 years. So over a period of 60 years, I know that combination of combination of pigment 1 plus 2 plus 3 gives me a particular color. And I have thousands of such shade libraries with me. So I know the output with respect to the color. I also know the input, that the combination of 1, 2, 3 is going to give me this particular color. So when I have thousands of inputs and thousands of outputs, what the ANN network does is that software does is it builds passages, or it builds pathways of connecting these inputs with the outputs. And once the pathway is known, for any unknown output that is there, I know what input has to be provided. Okay, am I clear? So this is how I train the software, and then whenever I give an unknown output that has to be produced, it knows what inputs have to be given for that unknown output to come out. Okay, and this is one very, very interesting area of work which is being looked at by many people. And there are some very good journals like Color Research and Application, Journal of Optical Society of America, JOA. These are some of the very good journals which you can refer for many of this work on color. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, dear students, dear participants, if you have any question, you can ask. You can unmute yourself and you can directly ask.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Sir, can we use ANN for treating night blindness or color blindness?
See here what happens is there has to be some amount of what they call as bionics. Like basically it's electronics. So because you will require some receptor, in the human eye for that radiation to get captured, and then it to get converted into a signal for the brain. So what happens in this, like when I say red, blue and green, basically there is a chemical reaction. There is a protein called as rhodopsin, which when light falls, there is bleaching and there is a reversible reaction, which produces a signal and which says that, okay, it's a blue signal, it's a red signal or a green signal. Now, ANN is a tool wherein typically, you require huge amount of very clean data. So there is something called as a stochastic process, which I don't know. Like let's say 100 people have got corona. Okay. But out of 1,000 people, 100 people are having corona. All 1,000 people could be subjected to the same circumstances, the same air that they breathe maybe, or same thing. But only 100 get corona. Now these are something called as stochastic processes, wherein you don't have a clear-cut causative for a particular outcome. Typically biological phenomena or weather-related phenomena. You don't know all the causes that will cause rainfall to happen. Some 4 or 5 causes, but there are some good 8-10 causes which are completely blind, which you are blind to. In such cases, what happens is you take a lot of data, historical data, which is clean, which is available with you. And you know that, okay, when the humidity was XYZ, when the temperature was XYZ, when the dew point was XYZ, when the latitude is this much, when the wind speed was this much, that time the rain falls. There is no clear-cut relation between each of these components with the outcome. But you've got a lot of historical data. In that case, you can use this ANN. And cleaner the data, larger the data, better is the outcome. So that's why in case of some of these color blindness treatment part, ANN would be difficult because human beings keep on changing and you don't have very clean data. Okay, you don't have.
Sir, I mean like machine learning technologies. It recognizes itself, and the machine learning also uses the same kind of data.
Yeah. So machine learning is, so ANN or this artificial intelligence is part of machine learning itself. It bases the data or the training. So what you have to do is basically, even for machine learning, basically first you have to have a learning loop for and that learning happens through data. Basically, that learning will again happen through a clean set of data. And then you have these multiple ways by which, there are these regressions and there are these complex mathematics and programming that is done. So you have these softwares, I think R is there and Python is there, which then converts this data and then builds these pathways for between input and output.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sankesh. Amit sir, there is one question. How do RGB, red, green, and blue sensors in mobile work in quantifying the impurities in water?
In water?
Yeah.
So water, I don't know. See, typically a clean water would have a particular color, which can be defined. But I don't think purity of water, is it the purity of water that is defined? Because see, purity of water is a very nebulous term. Like when I say pure, I may have pathogens in them, but they may look very clean. Or I may have a slightly colored water because of some of the minerals, which will affect the RGB values. But they may be pathogen free. So when I say pure, what do we mean? Do I mean that pure in terms of presence of minerals or color imparting material? Or when I say pure, I mean it to be pathogen free.
Okay. Yes, any question?
Yeah, RGB will basically define the color of the water. And typically you don't use RGB. There are some other color parameters, but something similar to that. So we can measure the color of water and then maybe define that. See, typically what happens is if there is some iron, so it tends to be slightly redder. You will see soil towards Goa and that side is redder because there is iron. So basis that sometimes we can correlate the quantity of iron with the color. That can be done.
Okay. Yes, dear participant, if you have any question, you can ask. Yes, I think there is no question. Yes. Amit sir, I think there is no question from participant. Seema ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Proceed for vote of thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Milind sir. I'm really grateful to express a vote of thanks to today's speaker, Dr. Amit Joshi, for enlightening us on the color physics, giving various examples from swimming pool, hospital to the shopping aspects concerning the color, which made the sessions very interesting and all could connect very easily. Also, at the same time, sir gave very important aspects of the colors, like a vision, metamerism, color blindness, color mixing system, color communication. So thank you so much, sir, for such a very informative session with our students. I would also like to thank our principal, Dr. Neha Chattani ma'am, our IQSC team, our IIC team, for all the support we are getting from the college, our head of the department, Namrata Ajwani ma'am, and most important and specifically, the enthusiastic and the energetic Dr. Milind Kulkarni sir for arranging such a wonderful sessions. And last but not the least, our lovely students who made the sessions a grand success with an active participation. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you once again, Dr. Amit Joshi sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Seema ma'am. Thank you so much, Dr. Amit Joshi sir, and dear participants. Now we can end this session.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Amit sir. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you all.